security guard is patrolling at truck stops of America's stop on North 1st Avenue just off of Interstate 24 as per usual. As this truck stop in Nashville is incredibly busy and borders on an area that has a high crime rate, security guards regularly patrol the area, and it is also overseen by a network of CCTV cameras. As he continues walking, he soon makes a horrifying discovery. The body of a woman is found. She has been shot dead and posed on her back with her feet together and legs apart, with her arms above her head. He quickly calls emergency services. Little did the police know, this would put them in a race against time to find a sadistic serial killer before he struck again. 25-year-old Sarah Hulbert had had a difficult life. After losing her mother at a young age, she was sent to live with relatives out of state. She would later move back to Tennessee to be closer to her siblings. After falling in love, she would go on to have 2 daughters who were the center of her world. The happiness was not to last, however. She would soon spiral into a drug addiction after her relationship had fallen apart and she had become a single mother as a result. She had tried to beat her crack cocaine addiction for the sake of her 2 young children. As she continued to fall deeper into drug addiction, her daughters were removed from her care. In bids to get clean, she would be in and out of rehab several times. But without her children, she spiraled further into the destructive addiction that had taken so much from her. She had become a sex worker to buy drugs and would often visit truck stops to make money. Detective Sergeant Pat Postolione arrived on scene at the truck stop. One thing that immediately stood out to him was the lack of blood at the scene. This indicated the victim had been killed elsewhere, and then her body had been moved to that location and posed in the lewd position. Due to the positioning of the body and lack of evidence from the scene of the crime, it was the worst fears of officers that this was not a first-time killing. This was someone who had killed before. The task that lay before the officers was huge. This was an incredibly busy truck stop with truckers and people coming and going all the time. But one thing they knew was that her body had been dumped there within the previous 30 minutes. The security guard who had made the discovery said she wasn't there when he last checked half an hour ago. As officers found out and began conducting a search of the scene near the body, they found a footprint with an unusual sole that was often seen in work boots. It was vital for the officers to check the CCTV, and it was this that would give them a major lead. A yellow truck is seen coming in and driving all the way to the back of the truck stop, where the body of the woman had been discovered by the security guard. 16 minutes later, the truck is seen coming back out. Checks from the stop revealed no evidence to show that the truck had stopped to refill or buy food. As the investigations of the crime scene continued, post-mortem was carried out on the victim. Her body was found to have bruises and cuts, indicating a struggle had taken place. Her body also showed signs of torture. Her rear had a significant injury, suggesting part of her skin had been cut out with a knife. Semen found inside her body was sent off to have the DNA analyzed. It was revealed that she had died from a single close-range gunshot wound, the .22 caliber gun. Running her fingerprints through the database, it came back with a match, and they could finally put a name to their victim. She was 25-year-old Sarah Hulbert. Her family were immediately contacted. They went straight to the coroner's office in disbelief, hoping that maybe it wasn't her. A few months prior to her death, she had made the decision to finally overcome her demons and was in recovery after another rehab stint. But sadly, she would later relapse and begin using again. Near to where her body had been discovered, there was a hole in the fence where drug dealers and sex workers would enter and exit the truck stop to avoid being seen by the security guards. Her sisters mentioned to the police that she had 2 known male associates who were also in the drug scene, and police believed they were with her the night she had been murdered. The men were soon tracked down and questioned. As they were involved in the drug scene, they were reluctant to talk to the investigators. However, when the seriousness of the situation they found themselves in began to dawn on them, they admitted to being her pimps. They were adamant they had absolutely nothing to do with her murder. They'd been driving around with Sarah at about 10 p.m. on June 26th and an argument had broken out. They said she exited the vehicle and went into the truck stop. Sarah Hulbert never returned. After waiting a few hours and she still hadn't come back, they assumed she must have left with the trucker, and so they too decided to leave. They agreed to give DNA samples to clear their names. When the results came in, the semen sample taken earlier did not match either of their DNA. They were ruled out as suspects. The DNA sample did not match with any sample from the sex offender database. The police then turned to the FBI for help to see if they had any cases on their nationwide database that matched the modus operandi of this one that had been committed in a different jurisdiction, and this would lead to the news that could blow the case wide open. There had been a previous murder of a woman in Lebanon, Tennessee on June 6, 2007. Just off of Interstate 40, the naked body of a woman was found in a garbage bin in a Pilot Station truck stop on Murfreesboro Road. She was later identified as 48-year-old Samantha Winters. She was a sex worker and had worked at the same truck stop where Sarah had been found. Police believed that she had been picked up at the Nashville truck stop, murdered, and then her body taken out to Lebanon. Her body had been posed and she had been killed by a .22 caliber gun. But the horrifying information did not stop there. The database had 2 more matches in different states, with these murders taking place before Sarah Holbert had been killed. One of these victims had been a woman called Sherry Drinkard, who was 43 years old. Her naked body had been dumped and then posed, just like the other victims, in Lake Station, Indiana, by the side of the road. And she too had died from a gunshot wound to the head, fired from a .22 caliber weapon. The other victim was found in a motel car park in Georgia on the 29th of January, 2007 at 5 p.m. Like the other victims, she had died from a gunshot wound from a .22 caliber gun. They ran the fingerprints through the database to try and work out who she was. It was revealed that she was a mother of 5 from Atlanta, Deborah and Glover. She had spoken to her eldest child just a few hours before her death and asked her to tell her siblings that she had always and would always love them. She also told her not to call the number back. When she still hadn't contacted them, her daughter became increasingly concerned for her welfare. Deborah had been battling a drug addiction and working as a sex worker. In November 2006, her daughter tried to help her beat her addiction, and in December she had began to make big steps on the road to recovery. But she would soon disappear. Although Deborah had not been found in a truck stop, it was an area that was regularly used by truckers. The police now had 4 female victims spanning across different states. All sex workers, all posed in a degrading position, all dead from a .22 caliber gun. Detective Sergeant Pat Posiglione knew it was vital to revisit the Nashville truck stop to make sure that absolutely no stone had been left unturned. As he was driving, he saw a truck headed towards him, bearing a striking resemblance to the one seen on the CCTV footage, taken from the night Sarah Holbert had been murdered. Postiglione turned around and followed the truck after calling his colleagues to tell them what he had seen and give them a description of the vehicle. He approached the truck after it had pulled into the truck stop, but got no response after banging on the door. After banging for a second time, a man pulled the window curtain back and looked down at him. Postiglione explained that he was with the police, and following this the driver opened the door and exited the truck. Postiglione would later say the driver appeared as if he had just been woken up. He was asked to present his driver's license and identify himself, and finally they had a name: Bruce Douglas Mendenhall. Postiglione engaged him in conversation, asking how long he had worked as a trucker and when the truck had last been in the area. Mendenhall said that the truck was last in Nashville in May. As the pair were talking, Postiglione spotted something. There was blood on Mendenhall's left arm and on the inside of the driver's side door. So as not to arouse suspicion, Postiglione told Mendenhall that officers were asking drivers of this kind of truck to provide DNA samples. Mendenhall signed the consent form and provided a mouth swab then and there. Postiglione asked him if he could look inside the truck. Mendenhall agreed. Behind the seats was a sleeping compartment where Postiglione found a pair of work boots. The sole bore a striking resemblance to the unusual footprints that had been found by Sarah's body. Behind the driver's seat was a black trash bag containing clothes, shoes, and tissues, all soaked in blood. Mendenhall explained that when he had been trying to enter the truck a few hours prior, he had accidentally cut his leg, and that was where the blood had come from. He was asked to show the cuts, but there was none. Mendenhall's story suddenly changed. He said the blood actually belonged to a sex worker he had picked up the night before, and she had cut her hand. Posiglione knew it was vital to ensure that Mendenhall did not have access to any weapons. Mendenhall explained that he did have a gun in the truck and handed it over to Posiglione. It was a .22 caliber rifle. Posiglione knew the game was up and bluntly asked him if this was the truck the police had been looking for. He asked several times before Mendenhall shrugged his shoulders and said, "If you say it is." Posiglione asked him if he was the person they had been searching for. Mendenhall gave the same response. He shrugged his shoulders and replied, "If you say so." By this point, Posiglione's partner had arrived on scene, and after he was escorted out of the truck, Bruce Mendenhall was arrested. It was vital to secure the truck and preserve any evidence, so it was sent to a crime lab to be processed. Over 300 items from his truck were cataloged as evidence, including handcuffs, knives, tape, and sex toys. Blood spatter was found on the walls, mattress, floor, and ceiling. The news that came next was more disturbing than anyone could have imagined. It emerged that the blood belonged to 7 different women. The bloody clothing found in the bag belonged to a sex worker from Indiana. Her family had not yet realized she had gone missing. The bullet that had killed Sarah Hulbert had been fired from the gun found in his truck, and the blood on the gun came back to her and at least one other woman. Mendenhall signed a rights waiver and said he would voluntarily give them a statement without the presence of a lawyer. But who exactly was Bruce Mendenhall? He had been born on April 14, 1951 in Crawford, Illinois. As an adult, he had lived on Pine Street close to downtown Albion. A neighbor from Pine Street would later say that visitors wouldn't often come to the Mendenhall household, adding, he was a little different. In 1997, he had ran in the mayoral elections, but incumbent Reverend Bill Rucker had won in a landslide. Mendenhall had come in last place. When looking into Mendenhall's background, the police discovered a man with no record of violence, and he had not had any run-ins with the law. On the face of it, he appeared to be a typical family man, married with 2 grown-up daughters. Jimmy Nesbitt reported for the Courier Press that Mendenhall had later moved into a small home in the country, surrounded by farms. This house would later be searched by police to try and help build a picture of who he was and add to their evidence. One of his neighbors recalled that Mendenhall and his wife had shown up on her driveway, his wife asking her if she wanted to purchase anything from a catalog. Mendenhall stayed in the vehicle. The neighbor said he just sat in the car and had a weird look on his face. The report in the Courier Press also said he would often ignore his neighbors if they tried to interact with him. The mayor of Albee and Ryan Hallam would say, he hadn't really had any run-ins with the law. Everybody thought he was a little mouthy and so forth like that. Anything off kilter? No, not too much. The minister from the church close to the Mendenhall's home said that after he was arrested, his family was struggling to come to terms with the news. The news of his arrest was the talk of the town. Mayor Hallam said, we've got 2,000 people. The news spreads like wildfire. People in Albion could not believe that one of their own was capable of such horrific crimes. Everyone's in disbelief that we had an individual living here like this. He didn't mix well with others around him, but we never had any problems with him, said Mayor Hallam. It was now time for the police to interview their suspect, but before they knew it, he made a shocking admission. He said that he had dumped the bodies, but he hadn't killed any of them. He explained that 2 men, Richie and David, were the real murderers they were looking for. He said they would go to every truck stop he went to, and by the time they left would be a dead body in his truck. He would later say that a 3rd person named Terry was also involved. He said they would leave him to clean up. He told the officers they would always use his gun to kill the women and then leave their bodies in his vehicle. When talking about Sarah Hulbert, he said that he had gone into the truck stop and when he came out, he found her dead body in his truck. He said that in a moment of panic, he took her body out of the truck and left her on the ground in the far corner of the stop. He told Postolione, I'm pissed off at Richie and David because they did all the killings. Officers did look into his claims and found that the 3 men in question did actually exist. They were all interviewed and their fingerprints and DNA samples were taken. It turned out he had had altercations with all of these men over minor things. He then offered up another shocking confession. The latest murder had actually taken place the day before in Indiana. They then presented him with the evidence that they had gathered from the truck. Despite his claims, there was only 1 set of prints on the gun, Bruce Mendenhall's. There was also no evidence to prove that any of those men had been in the back of the truck. When Mendenhall was asked if he was the killer, refused to talk anymore and requested a lawyer. The police, assisted by the FBI, worked in collaboration with investigators from the other jurisdictions where the murders had occurred. Using fuel receipts, they constructed a timeline of his movements and were able to place him in the locations the victims' bodies had been found. But what could the motive possibly have been? Posiglione would later say in a documentary, he thought that it was potentially his hatred of sex workers. There would be at the truck stops and his desire to degrade them post-mortem with the lewd posing of their bodies. Mendenhall's daughter disagreed and would say, he never had a negative thing to say about anyone who chose that lifestyle. There's people like that will do that. Everybody knows that. Dad, he didn't really pay attention to it. He was charged with criminal homicide and taken to the Metro Davison County Jail, where he was held without bond. Following this, it was time for Bruce Mendenhall to go on trial for the murder of Sarah Hulbert. His attorney Jason Gickner said that he had entered a plea of not guilty by video arraignment. The prosecution's case rested heavily on the plethora of physical evidence that had been gathered. Prosecutors were not seeking the death penalty, as there were no aggravating circumstances that are required in the state of Tennessee. They also ensured that the jury were reminded of Sarah and who she was. They wanted to emphasize that she was a real person, with children and a family who cared deeply for her. She was not just another piece of the evidence. After closing arguments, the jury retired to consider the evidence, and before long, they had reached their verdict. Bruce Mendenhall was found guilty of the first-degree murder of Sarah Holbert. In Tennessee, a first-degree murder conviction and subsequent life sentence is interpreted to mean 60 years in prison. A shocking story would soon be reported. Whilst in prison, his wife had passed away from natural causes. Following her death, Mendenhall received the insurance money. He used this money to offer $15,000 to 2 inmates to kill the 3 men he had tried to blame for the murders. One of the murders was due to be staged as a copycat, to mislead the police into thinking the real murderer was still out there. But it didn't stop there. He had allegedly tried to have 2 investigators, Pat Postolione and Lee Freeman, murdered. Postolione would later remark that in his career spanning more than 3 decades, he had never known of someone trying to have him murdered. He said, "When you are putting people away in prison, potentially for the rest of their lives, I guess you could possibly become a target for those reasons. So we take it very serious." In 2010, he went on trial for these offenses. The court heard from the 2 inmates he had tried to pay to commit the murders. One of them was in prison for explosives charges. Was asked by prosecutor Rachel Sobrero, what were his words to the best of your recollection? He replied, "How much C4 would it take to blow up a trailer?" They also heard from the other inmates who were serving 10 years on burglary charges. He was belligerent about those 2 officers. He wanted those 2 officers dead. That's point blank what he said. At around 2:30 p.m., the jury retired to deliberate, and less than 4 hours later, they had reached a verdict. He was found not guilty of the allegations relating to wanting to have the 2 officers killed. When it came to the plot to have the 3 other men killed, he was convicted. Davidson County Criminal Court Judge Steve Doser sentenced him to 30 years in prison, 10 years for each count that would be served consecutively. He was also charged with the murder of Samantha Winters. On the 2nd of August 2007, Mendenhall waived his right to a preliminary hearing, and a few weeks later on the 17th, Bruce Mendenhall was indicted by a Wilson County grand jury for the murder of Samantha Winters. Prior to standing trial in this case, Mendenhall filed an appeal against his conviction for the murder of Sarah Holbert. He argued that his legal counsel had been ineffective. He said there were 7 possible suspects and that his lawyers could have shown evidence to demonstrate this. However, it was noted that he had failed to give said list to the court. His appeal also said he wanted further DNA testing to be carried out. The Tennessee Criminal Court of Appeals rejected this. Since his appeal had been rejected, the trial for Samantha's case could now go forward. His lawyer said, "If you look at the crime in Lebanon under the truck stop murders, it's really not the sign of a serial killer. They got a lot of blood evidence. They've got pages of blood evidence, but none of it is from Samantha Winters. It's from Sarah Holbert." But the prosecution fired back saying, "I don't care what kind of person Samantha Winters was, what kind of life she led. She didn't deserve this." When all the evidence had been presented, the jury would deliberate for less than 2 hours before they returned a verdict of guilty for abuse of a corpse and first-degree murder. He again was sentenced to life in prison. In 2008, it was reported he had been linked to yet another killing. 28-year-old Letitia Yvonne Milliken had gone missing from Nashville. She was living in a makeshift camp off of Hermitage Avenue amongst other homeless people. She had also been a sex worker. Postolione had worked with her family to try and find her. Her family hadn't heard from her for the last couple of months. And on the 26th of June 2007, a missing persons report was filed. The same day Sarah Holbert's body had been found. The police had been given an item that contained Letitia's DNA to compare with some of the blood found in Mendenhall's truck. Came back as a match. Karma Papora was a 32-year-old mother to 2 children and was known to visit truck stops regularly. She had last been seen in the south side of Indianapolis, Interstate 465, at a Flying J truck stop. Sergeant Matt Mount of the NPD said, "They've taken DNA from both parents to try and match with the DNA from the blood on the clothing that was found inside the truck down in Tennessee. The DNA tests came back as a match." The police also found the clothes she had been wearing that day, her phone and her bank card. On the 10th of April 2008, Mendenhall was charged with the murder of Karma Papora, even though her body hadn't been found. Helen Marshall, the deputy prosecutor for Marion County, said, "It definitely makes it much more difficult to proceed. We are working very hard to be able to file the case against him here." August 15th, 2011, at the 8-mile marker of the Libby B. Nunn Parkway in Kentucky, human remains were found. The medical examiner's office used DNA to identify the person. It came back as being the remains of Karma Papora. In Birmingham, Alabama, Mendenhall was charged with the murder of Lucille Carter, known as Gretna. She had been found in a bin. A bag was covering her head and face, and there was tape wrapped around her neck. She had also been left naked and, like the other women, she had died from a bullet fired from a .22 caliber gun. Indianapolis Deputy Police Chief Scott Robinette said, Yet we have not found those victims. The brutal and depraved crimes of Bruce Mendenhall have left families and communities in tatters. His crimes are impossible to comprehend, with no motive, and the full extent of them may never be fully known. Many are holding on to the hope that they will one day have the answers they desperately need, and that their loved ones will see justice be served. The case of Christa Baker Alexander. Christa Ann Baker was born on November 27, 1983, in Laurel and Jones County, Mississippi, to Pastor Winford Baker and Patty Ann Baker. She was the youngest of 3 children with 2 older brothers. When Christa was 8 years old, her family moved to Obota Springs, Louisiana, where they built a church and actively participated in its activities. Growing up, Christa traveled extensively with Christian missionary organizations to help those in need, particularly children. She was homeschooled and later pursued a degree in Christian education through online courses at the North Tennessee Bible Institute. Christa's passion was serving others, especially children, and she hoped to start her own family one day. However, her faith took priority, and she dreamed of finding a husband who shared her values. Christa adhered to traditional values and chose to save herself for marriage, only dating with the intention of finding a lifelong partner. During this time, she developed close friendships, including one with Cuddy Alexander, a fellow youth pastor who shared her passion for missionary work. Cuddy was a charismatic and well-liked individual in his community. Their families met through the church and maintained a good relationship. Cuddy had been friends with Christa for many years before he asked her father, Winford Baker, for permission to marry her. Her father happily agreed. During their courtship, Cuddy and Christa followed church traditions and refrained from intimate contact. Christa had even told her parents that she wanted to save her first kiss with Cuddy for their wedding day. While Christa helped her parents at church, Cuddy was pursuing a career as a paramedic. A year later, they decided to get married. On March 1, 2008, they exchanged vows in front of their families and church members. The wedding was a joyful celebration, and Christa was a beautiful bride. However, their happiness was short-lived. Just 4 months after the wedding, tragedy struck. On June 29, 2008, Cuddy returned home from a night shift at around 6 a.m. to find Christa lying face down on the floor. She was dead. Cuddy immediately called the police. Christa's body was found near the front door with no signs of a struggle. A bullet wound was discovered in the back of her head with burn marks on her skin indicating that the shot was fired at close range. The gunshot wound suggested that the gun was positioned at the back of Christa's head when the shot was fired. A 9mm shell casing was found on the floor next to her body. Initially, investigators thought the crime might have been a botched robbery. It was possible that someone broke into the house, assuming it was empty, and then killed Christa to avoid leaving a witness. Police had thoroughly searched the house. A jewelry box was found on the bed. The gun cabinet had been forced open, and Christa's purse was on the kitchen table, showing signs of having been rummaged through. Additionally, many drawers and cabinets were left open, suggesting that the perpetrator was looking for something of value. After completing their search of the house, police began interviewing individuals who had access to the property. Christa's husband, Cuddy Alexander, was the first person they spoke with. However, he was too distraught to answer questions immediately, and investigators had to wait for him to compose himself. Once he was able to speak, Cuddy reported that everything had seemed normal the previous night before he left for his overnight shift as an emergency medical technician with Cadden Ambulance. He told that he called Christa multiple times throughout the night, but she didn't answer her phone. He also sent her several text messages, which she didn't respond to. Assuming she was just tired and had fallen asleep, he didn't think much of it. However, when he returned home the next morning, he was met with a disturbing scene. The front door was slightly open, and upon entering, he found their belongings scattered everywhere and Christa lying on the floor with a fatal gunshot wound to the head. He immediately checked her pulse and confirmed that she was dead. Panicked, he called 911 right away. The investigators were tasked with determining who could have entered the house while he was at work. It was possible that the perpetrator waited until Christa was alone before striking. They also explored the possibility that Christa may have let the killer into the house herself, as there were no signs of a struggle on her body or in the house. This suggested that she may have known her attacker and didn't feel threatened until it was too late. Cuddy informed the investigators that a rifle and a shotgun were missing from the gun cabinet. What made the situation even more tragic was that Krista was 17 weeks pregnant, meaning that not only had he lost his wife, but also their unborn child. Cuddy was overcome with grief and struggled to come to terms with the loss, unsure of how to move forward with his life. The case involved 2 victims, not one. The crime scene appeared unusual to investigators. The house was messy, but it didn't seem like the result of a typical burglary. Cabinets and drawers were open, but there was no evidence of rummaging or searching for specific items. It was as if the perpetrator wanted to mislead the police. The jewelry box was also open, but the jewelry was still intact, which raised suspicions. Krista's purse was open, yet all its valuable contents remained. The police noted that 2 firearms were missing from the house, but this was unusual because there were more firearms in the house that were not taken. This led investigators to wonder why the perpetrator didn't take all the available firearms. Based on these observations, investigators concluded that the crime scene was staged. It appeared that the perpetrator intended to kill Krista Alexander and then make it look like a robbery. As a result, the police began interviewing their neighbors to gather more information. This led to an unexpected lead in the case. Mathis Rabel, the 69-year-old neighbor and was landlord of the Alexanders, described they as quiet and recently married. They were active members of the Fundamental Baptist Church. Mavis remembered Krista Alexander as a kind and helpful woman who rarely went outside without her husband. Mavis last saw they on Saturday afternoon when Cuddy Alexander was collecting the bodies of turtles he had shot in his backyard pond. This led investigators to discover that Cuddy owned a gun. However, when police searched the Alexanders' home, they did not find a gun. Cuddy claimed that only a rifle and a shotgun had been stolen from the house, but he never mentioned a handgun. Detectives suspected that Cuddy might be hiding something. They searched the pond area and found several 9mm shell casings in the grass. These casings were similar to the one found near Krista's body. The police sent the casings to the state crime lab for analysis. The lab report confirmed that the gun Cuddy used to shoot the turtles was the same gun used to shoot Krista. Investigators summoned Cuddy to the police station for further questioning regarding his wife's death. He maintained that it was impossible for him to have committed the crime. Cuddy explained that he had left for work at 5 p.m. on Saturday, June 28, 2008, and returned home the next morning at 6 a.m., providing an alibi that he was working throughout the night. Upon verification, Cuddy's colleagues corroborated his claim, stating that he was indeed present at work all night. When inquired about the firearm, Cuddy revealed that he owned a gun but claimed to have sold it the day prior to the incident to an unknown man named Steve. The alleged buyer had paid $500 in cash, which made verifying this claim difficult. According to Cuddy, Steve was described as a white male in his mid-30s, around 6 feet 1 inch tall, driving an old Toyota pickup truck. Krista's parents shared their concerns with investigators, stating that they didn't believe Cuddy's account of events. Her father, Winford Baker, noted that Cuddy showed little emotional response to Krista's death, a behavior that had started a few months before their wedding. They had been experiencing financial difficulties since moving in together, and the impending arrival of their child was likely to add to their struggles. Krista's parents also suspected that Cuddy was having an affair with a colleague who had even attended their wedding. Krista had confided in friends just weeks before her death that she suspected Cuddy was cheating on her. As investigators dug deeper into the marriage, they became increasingly convinced that Cuddy and Krista had different visions for their future. However, was this enough motive for Cuddy to take Krista's life, especially given that she was carrying their unborn child? The police had one lead, a man named Steve, who Cuddy claimed had bought the gun used to kill Krista. Investigators set out to find Steve using the description provided by Cuddy. Meanwhile, they brought Cuddy in for further questioning, asking him to provide a detailed account of his activities before, during, and after work on the day of Krista's death. This time, his story differed from his initial statement. The investigators found several inconsistencies in Cuddy's story. He failed to mention a man named Steve, who was allegedly at his house, and to whom he had sold a gun. Additionally, while on duty, Cuddy showed no concern for his pregnant wife Krista's well-being when she didn't answer his calls, despite knowing she was home alone. He could have asked a family member to check on her, but didn't. Furthermore, the crime scene appeared to have been staged, which raised suspicions about Cuddy's involvement. As the investigators applied pressure, Cuddy's story began to unravel. After several hours of interrogation, he changed his story entirely. He claimed that he had been sleeping on the couch before his night shift and that his wife had woken him up late. He stated that he wasn't angry with her for waking him up late and that it wasn't an issue. Cuddy then explained that he had been walking around the house with a gun, intending to take it to work because a colleague was interested in buying it. He said he was fooling around, aiming the gun at objects and making click, click noises. He approached Krista from behind, put the gun to the back of her head, and claimed that an accidental shot occurred. He maintained that it was an accident and that he didn't intend to harm her. When he realized Krista was dead, he was scared and didn't know what to do. Cuddy Alexander admitted to staging a crime scene to make it look like a robbery. He took several items from his house, including weapons and a DVD player, and drove to work with the front door left open. His plan was for someone to discover the open door and lights on and then find his wife while he was at work. However, this plan failed. On his way to work, Alexander threw a pistol and other items, including his wife's jewelry, out of the car window. By the time he arrived at work, the only items left in the car were a DVD player and a Sony radio. He gave the DVD player to a colleague, Allison Sharp, with whom he had been having an affair. Alexander and Sharp kissed and held hands before and after his wedding, spending one night at a Baton Rouge hotel. While his wife Krista was at church camp, he took Sharp to a hotel for a jacuzzi evening with fine china plates, meal, and wine amidst supposed financial difficulties. With his low salary of $11 per hour and stalled professional certification efforts. County and his pregnant wife, Krista, were struggling financially and unemployed, and on top of that, their washing machine had broken. But Alexander managed to come up with money for a romantic evening at Callaway Inn with his mistress, Sharp. Police later determined that a shocking act unfolded in the home, contradicting Cuddy's initial claim that Krista's death was accidental. Detectives found it difficult to prove direct involvement, but believed Cuddy's explanation was suspicious. Despite the challenges, police were convinced that Krista's death was not an accident, and Cuddy's actions raised more questions than answers. After the police arrested Cuddy Alexander, Krista's parents were able to find the strength to forgive him. The Baker family came together to mourn the loss of their beloved daughter and what would have been their fourth grandchild. Krista's father, Winford Baker, remembered her fondly, saying she was a sweet and lovely person. Krista had made a significant impact on those around her, having completed 17 mission trips during her lifetime. Winford Baker recalled a conversation he had with Cuddy shortly before his arrest. Although it was brief, Baker described the encounter as emotional, saying, "We hugged and cried together." Despite his desire for justice, Baker stated that he had already forgiven Cuddy. "We forgave him even before we knew who was responsible," he said. Baker found comfort in knowing that Krista was now in a better place, saying, "She's with the Lord, in heaven, and at peace." The trial started on August 2, 2009. Prosecutors claimed that Cuddy's behavior after Krista's death implied that he had acted on purpose. They wondered why he didn't call 911 right away if the shooting was truly an accident. Instead, faked a robbery and left Krista's body for 12 hours before going home and calling 911. Prosecutors also questioned Cuddy's story that the shooting was accidental, noting that he was an experienced gun owner who had received proper training from his father. Cuddy Alexander, 24, was charged with second-degree murder for the death of his wife. Krista Cuddy had admitted to being involved in her death, which he claimed was a result of his poor decision-making. After initially going to trial, Cuddy suddenly changed his plea to guilty, ending jury deliberations. This unexpected turn of events came about when Krista's family agreed to a plea deal that had been proposed earlier. Alexander was sentenced to 55 years in prison. The case of Christina and Thompson Harris. Christina and Thompson and Jason Thomas Harris, both 40, had been married for 11 years by 2014. They got married in 2003 after dating for about 5 years. In 2009, Christina and Jason welcomed their first child, which brought significant changes to their lives. Despite the daily challenges and responsibilities, they were happy to be parents. Christina took care of the house and the children while Jason worked at a plastics factory. As the children grew up, Christina was able to contribute financially to the family by working. However, in May 2014, she had to take maternity leave because she was expecting their second child in a few weeks. On September 29, 2014, Jason chatted with Christina while at work. Christina was suffering from a cold. She had a bad cough and was not sleeping well, but she reassured her husband that she was fine. A few hours later, Jason called his wife at home but received no response, which worried him. Unable to reach Christina, Jason asked a neighbor to check on her. He explained that Christina was sick and not answering the phone. The neighbor knocked on the front door but got no answer, so she called Christina's name. Receiving no response, she decided to try the door, found it unlocked, and entered the house. When she entered the bedroom, she found Christina lying on the bed and could not wake her. The neighbor called 911 and ran out of the house to call another neighbor, a nurse. The nurse checked Christina's pulse and confirmed that she had died. Thus, on September 29, 2014, for months after the birth of her second child, Christina was found dead at home. When the police arrived, Jason Harris was present. He told the police and paramedics that his wife had been sick but was alive when he left for work that morning. 2 days later, the medical examiner ruled that Christina died from an overdose of a controlled substance, a finding that shocked her family and friends. Most people who knew Christina, a mother of two, including a newborn, believed that she had never used drugs. Christina's mother, Kathy, told police that her daughter was fine when she saw her the day before she died. Police were therefore skeptical of Jason Harris's claim that his wife had a cold. According to Kathy, Christina said her marriage to Jason was complicated. Jason was unhappy with the marriage but did not want a divorce because of concerns about child support and custody. Neighbors who discovered Christina's body also provided additional information to the police. Jason reportedly told them that the night before Christina died, he had prepared cereal with milk for her. Then Christina passed out and dropped the plate. Police realized that Christina's family and friends had a hard time accepting that she might be involved in drugs. Instead, police suspected that Jason Harris was involved in Christina's death. Christina's mother and sisters insisted that police test her breast milk. According to Kathy, the police ignored the request for 48 hours. However, thanks to the family's persistence, the police finally agreed to investigate. As a result, breast milk was used as evidence for the first time in Michigan history. As confirmed by Christina's family and friends, all drug tests at her workplace and at the hospital where she gave birth to her second child were negative. Her second child was only 4 months old when Christina died. Christina was breastfeeding, and Kathy confirmed that Christina was very careful about what she put into her body because she didn't want to affect her child. Christina often pumped breast milk while at work and stored it in the freezer. Some of the breast milk was left at Kathy's mother's house. They tested 3 bags of breast milk for possible drug residue. These bags were labeled with the date they were put in the freezer so Christina knew which bag to thaw first. Experts tested all the samples, including the ones frozen just before Christina died, and found no signs of drugs. This proves that Christina did not use the substance that killed her. Jason Harris's sister was the only one who suggested that Christina had used drugs, prompting investigators to focus more on Jason and treat Christina's death as a homicide. The investigation was slow, and it is unclear what would have happened if Christina's family had not been actively involved in the search for the truth. Kathy repeatedly reminded Davison police about her daughter's case in August 2016, nearly 2 years after Christina's death. Not seeing the enthusiasm and desire to solve her daughter's case in Davison, Kathy asked Davison police to turn the case over to the Michigan State Police, which had new investigators. From there, the story began to unravel. Police gathered a lot of information about Jason Harris, including how he acted before and after his wife's death. Jason had been having affairs with other women. Christina knew about this and confided in her family and co-workers that Jason had been texting other people while she was giving birth to their youngest child. Christina once told a co-worker that if she died, Jason would be the cause. When asked if she was serious, she said yes. Jason told his co-worker that he suspected the second child was not his biological child. He also complained that after the birth, Christina became depressed, often stayed in bed and did not go to work. Jason often complained about Christina nagging him. A co-worker of Jason recalled that Jason may have told him that he wanted Christina dead. He described the relationship between Jason and Christina as toxic and recalled that they argued frequently. One of the most surprising and shocking things about this case is that Jason Harris did not hesitate to let everyone know that he wanted to get rid of his wife. He tried to do so, but unfortunately, no one paid attention to his words and actions before Christina died. Jason bought poison twice and mixed it into her drink. Both times, Christina felt that the taste was unusual and did not drink it. Jason then asked a coworker to find him a poison that would not change the taste or smell of drinks or food. Jason said he wanted to knock Christina unconscious so she would not feel anything. When he shared with the coworker that Christina would not drink water because it tasted strange, the coworker refused to talk to him further. The coworker testified that Jason had talked about wanting Christina to stop nagging and that the coworker thought Jason was joking. Jason also told a coworker that he had hired someone to kill Christina, but the person was arrested for another reason before the murder. Jason therefore offered the coworker $10,000 from Christina's $100,000 life insurance policy to kill her. The coworker refused the offer, thinking that Jason was just venting his anger by talking about his wife and making inappropriate jokes. According to the colleague, he recalled a conversation with Jason in which Jason said, "I'm bored with her. I'm going to dump her." The police then decided to question the neighbor who discovered Christina's body. The neighbor testified that she saw Christina's family truck in the driveway, but Christina did not come to the door. She entered the house and found Christina lying in bed, unresponsive. The neighbor asked Jason if she should try to wake her up. He replied that Christina must have fallen asleep and that he would come home. The neighbor went back inside and removed the covers around Christina because she felt cold and had foam coming from her mouth and nose. The neighbor called 911 and another neighbor who was a registered nurse. The neighbor, who was a registered nurse, testified that Christina was cold, stiff, had no pulse, and had white foam coming from her mouth. She did not attempt to resuscitate Christina because she believed she was already dead. Jason told the police that he asked a neighbor to check on Christina and that he had to rush home because Christina was unresponsive. However, witnesses said Jason did not appear anxious or in a hurry. What raised suspicions about Jason was that morning he called Christina's supervisor at work. He told her that Christina had died the night before and that he wanted to inquire about the $100,000 death benefit from Christina's life insurance policy through work. Additionally, one of the women, Jason, had an intimate relationship with told investigators that Jason had contacted her on the day of Christina's death and said that his wife had died from an overdose of a controlled substance. This suggests that he knew what caused Christina's death even before the medical examiner's report. That evening, the neighbor he had asked to check on Christina saw him in his driveway. She said that Jason told her that Christina was not the angel her parents thought she was, and that their child would soon learn all the good and bad things about Christina. He said that Christina dropped her bowl of cereal, and he told her to go to bed. Jason also told a neighbor that his wife tossed and turned during the night, and that he heard her coughing before he left for work. Jason wondered if that was her last breath. Jason told a police officer that Christina was coughing a lot when he left the house. He also told the police that Christina fell asleep eating cereal the night before she died. Finally, Jason told Christina's mother, Kathy, that before she died, Christina complained that her water tasted like chemicals. One of the main motives in this case is believed to be insurance money. Within a week of Christina's death, Jason and his mother went to Christina's workplace to inquire about the life insurance money. Additionally, Jason received a $20,000 death benefit from a life insurance policy issued by his company shortly after Christina's death. One of Jason's lovers moved in with Jason and his children. Christina's mother believed that Jason's lover moved in with him after Christina's funeral. However, Jason's neighbor testified that the lover had even moved into Jason's home before Christina's funeral. The neighbor added that Jason's adult children from a previous marriage moved into the home within days of Christina's death. Police also discovered that Jason Harris purchased a plane ticket to Rhode Island 9 days after Christina's death to visit a woman with whom he had exchanged more than 5,800 text messages. County Medical Examiner Dr. Brian Hunter submitted postmortem blood and urine samples for laboratory testing. Dr. Hunter determined that the test results were consistent with Christina being poisoned by a lethal substance. Initially, Dr. Hunter determined that her death was an accident because there were no injection marks on Christina's body, and investigators did not find any powder residue or rolling papers next to the bed where Christina died. In 2016, the Michigan State Police took over the investigation into Christina's death. In 2019, after Christina's family disputed Christina's cause of death, Dr. Hunter later changed Christina's death certificate from an accident to a homicide. Police charged Jason with first-degree murder, solicitation of murder, and delivery of a controlled substance resulting in death. He was denied bail. Jason's attorney, Nicholas Robinson, said his client pleaded not guilty to the charges and wanted to fight them. When he was arrested, Jason had lost his job after testing positive for drugs. Kathy's efforts to ensure that law enforcement would punish the person responsible for her daughter's death were not overlooked. Gena's County Prosecutor David Layton said that a few years ago, he began receiving Facebook messages and emails from a Davidson woman who claimed her daughter had died and that her death was not an accident. "It can't be happening," the woman told the prosecutor. She was certain that someone had caused her daughter's death. Kathy's passionate pleas caught David Layton's attention, prompting authorities to re-examine the death of her daughter, Christina. "I will never forget what she wrote in an email, prosecutor. You are my last hope. This is our last chance to get justice for my daughter. Please help me, David Layton said. At that moment, and as I spoke to her this morning, I was absolutely convinced that her daughter's death was not an accident. It was the result of foul play. It was Kathy's relentless efforts to seek justice for her daughter's death that led to this situation, and those efforts paid off. The trial began in 2020. The prosecution alleged that Jason put a controlled substance in his wife's cereal bowl to kill her. He then went to work as usual, waited a few hours, and asked a neighbor to check on Christina. According to the prosecution, Jason wanted someone else to discover his wife's body in order to reduce suspicion against him. The direct evidence against Jason was overwhelming. Jason had a motive for killing Christina. He was having an affair with another woman, suspected she was cheating on him, believed the second child was not his, and was tired of her nagging. Jason did not want a divorce because he did not want to pay child support or lose custody of her. Before her death, Jason told a coworker that he wanted Christina dead. On the morning of her death, Jason called her company to inquire about a $100,000 life insurance policy. And in that call, he said Christina had died the night before. The jury heard clear evidence that Jason not only wanted Christina dead, but that he had tried to hire someone to kill her. He planned to do this and knew where to buy illegal drugs. In fact, he had purchased them on multiple occasions to give to Christina. At trial, multiple witnesses testified that Christina did not use drugs recreationally. Christina was very careful about what she consumed because she was breastfeeding. Furthermore, tests showed that her frozen breast milk contained no harmful substances. To support the theory that Jason had poisoned Christina's food, the prosecution presented toxicology reports. For example, Dr. Judge argued that Christina's death could have been caused by ingestion of some kind of poison. The prosecution ruled out injection because no traces of injection or needles were found at the scene. Dr. Judge also testified that inhalation was unlikely because no rolled-up dollar bills or snorting paper were found at the scene. The court gave Jason Harris a chance to speak, but he did not apologize or show remorse. Instead, he insisted that he was innocent. The judge said the jury did not believe your lies, ultimately exposing him as a selfish and deceitful murderer. On November 17, 2021, the jury found Jason Harris, 47, guilty on all charges. 3 weeks later, the court sentenced him to life in prison without parole. He has appealed the verdict, however. After the trial, prosecutor David Layton expressed his condolences to Christina's family and friends, emphasizing that this was a tragic case. Layton went on to say, "While this case has many unique and media-driven details, the most important thing is the family's loss. I hope this verdict helps them find comfort in knowing that justice has been served." Jason requested a new trial on the grounds that his defense attorney did not do a good job. He introduced evidence in the form of his attorney's testimony, showing that his defense attorney failed to seek an independent expert opinion on the prosecution's evidence and failed to consult with an independent toxicologist. Jason's defense attorney explained this decision as part of a trial strategy because he had thoroughly questioned Dr. Hunter and was able to show the jury that Dr. Hunter had changed his opinion about the cause of death based on information from a related civil lawsuit. In February 2024, the Michigan Court of Appeals upheld Jason Harris's conviction. He remains in prison for life without the possibility of parole. Born on March 7, 1988 in Bakersfield, California, Osuna's early life unfolded in a tumultuous manner. His mother, Michelle, was just 19 years old at the time, while little is known about his father except that he was 21, rebellious and undisciplined. Jamie's father displayed abusive tendencies toward Michelle from the start, even resorting to kicking her in the stomach while she was pregnant with Jamie. This cruel act left lasting harm on Haim, even before he took his first breath. Some speculate that this incident may have contributed to Haim's ear malformation and potentially impacted his brain development. Recognizing the abusive nature of her husband, Michelle made the courageous decision to divorce him. Soon afterward, she met Jeff, a man with whom she felt an instant connection, and it appeared that Jeff would step into the role of Jamie's new stepfather. Jamie's biological father strongly opposed this development. Despite Michelle's desire to sever ties with him, he persisted in causing trouble. One fateful night, he threatened Jeff by holding a knife to his throat. Thankfully, the situation didn't escalate further. He was apprehended and a restraining order was issued. This marks the last mention of Jamie's biological father in his story. Shortly thereafter, Michelle married Jeff, and they began cohabiting with Jamie and his brother, who was 2 years Jamie's senior. This is where the story takes a dark and troubling turn. While Jeff desired Michelle, he seemed less enthusiastic about assuming the role of a stepfather. Regrettably, this resulted in a period of misery for Jamie. While his older brother was somewhat spared, having gone to live with their grandparents once they became aware of Jeff's abusive behavior. It remains unclear why Jamie wasn't also taken in by his grandparents, but it seems that they declined to care for him, leaving one to wonder why they would reject a 3-year-old child. It's important to note that Michelle also made the choice to prioritize her relationship with Jeff over the well-being of her 2 young sons. Jeff's abusive actions were well documented through accounts from Michelle, Jamie, and records from hospitals and law enforcement agencies. On one occasion during a road trip with Michelle and Jamie secured in a baby carrier in the back seat, Jamie's crying provoked Jeff to a point where he began shouting at the child. Shockingly, he then threw the baby carrier out of the moving car. Fortunately, the baby carrier landed safely, and Jamie displayed no visible injuries. However, subsequent examinations revealed severe brain damage that could have resulted from this traumatic incident. Around the age of 5, another distressing incident marred Jamie's already tumultuous childhood. He accidentally spilled some juice on the floor, which infuriated Jeff. In a fit of anger, Jeff grabbed a belt and began to mercilessly beat the young boy. This time, Michelle intervened by calling the police. Jeff was subsequently arrested on charges of child cruelty due to the visible marks on Jamie's body. However, the charges were relatively lenient and disconcertingly, Jeff returned home just 10 days later with Michelle still standing by his side. Even after they had their own children, Jeff continued to mistreat Jamie, depriving him of proper meals and sometimes serving his food on the floor. Increasingly felt like an outsider in his own home. Michelle, though aware of her past mistakes, found herself unable to rectify the deep-seated damage that had been done. At the age of 12, Jamie finally managed to escape the clutches of his abusive household and went to live with his grandparents. Everyone had come to realize that Jeff's mistreatment of Jamie would not cease. It was during this time that they began to notice the emotional numbness that had gripped Jamie from a tender age. Michelle described it as if his soul had been torn away, leaving him apathetic towards everything and everyone around him. This period marked the onset of Jamie's disturbing behavior. He began cooking animals in a nearby forest, and in the absence of anyone at home subjected his own pet cat to chilling ordeals, locking it in the refrigerator and even the oven. He also turned to self-harm as it seemed to be the only way for him to feel something, anything, in a world where he felt utterly numb. At the age of 15, Jamie took a dire turn when he brutally stabbed another boy, leaving him gravely wounded but fortunate to survive the ordeal. This criminal act led to Jamie's incarceration in a juvenile correctional facility, where he would spend the next 4 years. It was during this period that Michelle finally confronted the gravity of her irresponsibility toward Jamie, resulting in her decision to divorce Jeff. A few years later, Jeff met his demise due to a heart attack. Given his abusive history, it's conceivable that Jamie might have inflicted harm upon him if he had not passed away. On September 14, 2007, Haim was released from prison at the age of 19. By this time, he had acquired a notorious reputation as a troublemaker, deeply entrenched in gang activities. He showed little interest in education or gainful employment, instead opting for a lifestyle characterized by revelry and association with his gang affiliates. The turning point in this harrowing narrative occurred in December 2008 when a 16-year-old boy's birthday party took a rather unexpected turn. This was no typical birthday celebration adorned with Mickey Mouse piñatas and cheerful decorations. Instead, it drew a crowd from the gritty underbelly of society, and the absence of any responsible adult to maintain order was notable. This unconventional gathering had been organized by the birthday boy's mother, who was known for her laissez-faire attitude. Joelle Castellano, a 37-year-old single mother of 3, played a central role in this intriguing tale. She decided to host a party for underage youths, which, while undoubtedly irresponsible, didn't spell the end of the world. As the evening progressed, however, things took a turn for the chaotic, with Joelle's dance with a young man catching the eye of her nephew. It seemed that this young relative became envious, possibly due to his own romantic feelings for his aunt, leading him to want to keep others away from her. In his quest to intimidate the young man, Joelle pointed to Jamie, who, despite not yet having the distinctive facial tattoos he would later acquire, stood at around 5'3". However, it was Jamie's demeanor and attitude that made him an intimidating presence, perhaps more so than anyone else in the room. Jamie agreed to confront the young man, proceeding to the kitchen, where he retrieved a knife and warned the boy to steer clear of Joel. The young man, believing that Jamie wouldn't actually follow through, issued a challenge. However, Jamie defied expectations and indeed stabbed the young man, leading to his return to prison. But something had changed this time. Couldn't shake one thought from his mind. He had fallen head over heels in love with Joel. It wasn't just because of the recent stabbing incident, but a genuine and profound love. As they say, love can compel us to commit acts beyond imagination. Jamie no longer cared about his circumstances. He believed he could win over Joel. Despite their age gap, his imprisonment, and their initial encounter involving a stabbing, began sending heartfelt love letters to Joel, and eventually she too succumbed to his affections. Thus, they embarked on a long-distance relationship. 11 months later, when Jamie completed his sentence, Joel picked him up in her truck. However, her confidence wavered upon seeing that Jamie had acquired facial tattoos, raising doubts about the seriousness of their relationship. Despite all the waiting, Yami's eagerness prevailed as he suggested to Joel that they spend the night in a motel. Joel agreed, albeit under the impression that it would be a one-night affair. Yet Jamie, known as the sharpshooter, proved remarkably effective, as that single night led to Joel becoming pregnant. With this development, she felt increasingly inclined to establish a lasting relationship with him. A mere 3 months later, they sealed their commitment in marriage. Jamie made solemn promises to Joel, assuring her that he understood the hardships of growing up in a fractured family and vowing to be a devoted father and husband. However, even before their child came into the picture, he exhibited abusive behavior towards Joel. It's at this point in the story that he began to adopt characteristics reminiscent of the Joker, not to sensationalize the narrative, but because there is a noticeable parallel. His abuse towards Joel wasn't solely physical. It had a strong psychological element, perhaps driven by the belief that this form of harm could be even more devastating. An example of this occurred during one heated argument when things spiraled out of control. Jamie seized the ashes of Joel's deceased mother from a vase and fled with them. He was keenly aware that Joel had not yet come to terms with her mother's passing, and this act prompted her to call the police. Jamie was arrested, but the ashes were never recovered. This unfortunate incident resulted in Jamie being sent back to prison, causing him to miss the birth of his child. Upon his release, Joel granted him another chance, hoping that, with the child's arrival, Jaime would take on the role of a responsible father. Unfortunately, this turned out to be a futile endeavor. Shortly thereafter, Jaime shifted his focus from physical harm to inflicting emotional distress on Joel. She did something that greatly disturbed individuals like him, who craved attention. She ignored him completely. Regardless of what he said or did, it no longer affected her. One day, in an attempt to provoke a reaction from Joel, pushed her 7-year-old son off the bed, all while keeping his gaze fixed on her. His tactics proved successful. She became visibly upset and fetched a knife from the kitchen. In a stern tone, she warned him, "Mess with me, but never with my kids." At that moment, Jamie's face betrayed his surprise and fear. He hadn't anticipated such a response. Frightened, he reached out to his gang to extricate him from the situation. While outside the house, Jamie turned to methamphetamines, which explains his current aged appearance, making him resemble a 60-year-old man. Now that he no longer officially resided with Joel, he commenced stalking her from outside her home. Joel called the police, leading to Yami's arrest and a 7-month prison sentence for violating his parole. However, within a week of his release, he resumed his harassment of Joel. She would spot him outside her window, his gaze unwavering, and he would make menacing phone calls, threatening her and her children. Joel contacted the police once again, but upon their arrival, they failed to locate Yami. Days passed with no trace of him. Then, on November 8, 2011, Joel received a chilling call from Jamie, in which he uttered the sinister words, "Check the news. I just killed a woman at the Morocco Motel." Naturally, Joel's immediate response was to contact the police. However, they didn't take her seriously. What transpired next is where the story takes an eerie turn, as it was 5 days after this call that a motel employee discovered a gruesome crime scene in one of the motel's rooms. The victim was a 37-year-old woman named Yvette, a mother of 6. Details are scarce, but it appears to have been an exceedingly horrific crime scene. Investigators, who deemed it one of the most disturbing cases in their careers, found evidence of 2 knives and scissors used in the slow and torturous manner of death. Jamie, it seemed, harbored a sadistic streak. You might wonder how I have access to these gruesome details. Well, this wouldn't be his solitary murder, nor the most heinous. Even more chilling is the absence of any apparent motive for targeting this woman, strongly suggesting that she became a victim solely because of her resemblance to Joel. Jamie would ultimately face arrest, trial, and sentencing for this horrifying murder. While incarcerated, Jamie took disturbing actions to further torment Joelle. He would occasionally contact Child Protective Services in an attempt to have her custody of her children revoked, knowing that this would inflict the most pain on her. He even went to the extent of trying to hire a hitman to eliminate her. However, because he communicated these intentions through letters, the police intercepted them before they could reach their intended recipient. These actions only added layers to the mask he wore, a facade he maintained to feel something, a desperate attempt to fill the void he had experienced as a child. The trial for the murder of Yvette dragged on for 5 years, during which Jamie displayed no remorse whenever he appeared in court. He would even wave and laugh at the victim's family. This extended trial was a result of Jamie's refusal to confess. It's worth noting that he managed to prolong the trial for more than half a decade by remaining silent. However, on March 24, 2017, just 3 days before the final trial, where the verdict was still uncertain, a news channel offered him an interview. They aimed to capitalize on his striking appearance to generate clicks and had planned to ask him challenging questions to elicit a confession. To everyone's astonishment, they didn't need to ask any questions because Jamie confessed to the murder of Yvette right at the start of the interview. It's evident that he did this to gain notoriety, as there is no doubt that he deliberately presented himself as a villain in the news. What corroborates this is his confession to 2 more murders, one at the age of 13 and the other at 19. The police initiated a search for the supposed victims based on Jamie's descriptions, since he hadn't provided any names. Given that he had spent his entire life in Bakersfield, the margin for error was minimal. However, the database did not yield any records of missing persons or unsolved murders that could be attributed to him. Therefore, it's highly likely that these claims are exaggerated. With all these confessions, was undoubtedly found guilty 3 days later. However, he did not receive the death penalty because of his confession on the day of the trial, which had caused a 5-year delay and wasted time and resources. Still, what remains perplexing to everyone is what happened next. Upon entering prison, he exhibited increasingly erratic behavior. He painted the walls of his cell with his own blood. On one fateful evening, he was placed in a cell with a man he harbored animosity towards, and he mercilessly stabbed him multiple times using a knife. He even inflicted a deep facial wound, requiring the victim to undergo 67 stitches. Jamie went so far as to request photographs of his victims as trophies, further underscoring the disturbing nature of his actions. He had earned a reputation as an inmate too dangerous to share a cell with anyone. But in a bewildering and illogical turn of events in March 2019, Jamie found himself with his first ever cellmate, a 44-year-old man named Luis Romero. In 1992, at the tender age of 17, Luis, originally from Guatemala, had joined a gang in the United States and had taken someone's life during a confrontation with rival gang members. He had been sentenced to 27 years in prison and was on the verge of completing his sentence. However, in a confounding and irrational twist of fate, he was assigned to the same cell as Jamie, who had committed a more gruesome crime. Jamie was well aware of the extent of his own actions, having just committed them, boasting a lengthy history of criminal deeds. Moreover, he had been denied cellmates in the past because of the perceived danger he posed. Luis was merely 3 weeks away from regaining his freedom. In less than 24 hours since they had become cellmates, on the morning of March 9, 2019, when correctional officers came to inspect their cell, they stumbled upon an eerie sight. Jamie was smiling, wearing a collar. This collar was fashioned from various parts of Luis's body, and Jamie had gone as far as carving a grotesque, clown-like smile on Luis's face. He had toyed with his lifeless body, inscribed messages on the walls using blood, and declared, "I am the man of 1,000 faces." Now, the theories start to surface because it is evident that such an atrocity would require more than a mere hour. It would take many hours to commit such unspeakable acts. A correctional officer responsible for conducting a nighttime check reported that everything was in order, even though Luis's body indicated that the gruesome assault had already begun at that hour. Some guards attempted to justify this oversight by claiming that Jamie had placed a blanket to conceal the ongoing horror. But if an inmate places a blanket to obscure events behind a cell door, it is incumbent upon the guard to enter and investigate. What transpired here was not an isolated incident at this prison. It occurred at a prison which had gained notoriety due to allegations of guards organizing fights among inmates, all while placing bets on the outcomes. There exist videos of these fights, complete with a presenter and commentator. Furthermore, suspicions linger that this practice was employed when authorities sought to dispose of a troublesome inmate. They would orchestrate a fight, and when one participant was winning, they would shoot the other inmate, claiming they were intervening to save them. This case presents further complexity due to Jamie's clearly deteriorated mental state. It is evident that he harbors a fascination with the Joker, as evidenced by the blood-written phrases from the comics adorning his cell. It remains a mystery how he managed to procure razors to make knives, and his letter to a prosecutor inspired by the Joker and featuring the iconic "Why so serious" phrase raises questions. The letter also contains satanic messages, although it's doubtful he genuinely adheres to Satanism. These actions are likely undertaken for attention-seeking purposes. He received a diagnosis of an unknown form of schizophrenia within the spectrum, alongside antisocial personality disorder, borderline personality disorder, characterized by erratic behavior, which could explain his propensity to stab others without a clear provocation, and post-traumatic stress disorder. As a result, authorities declared him unfit to stand trial. Consequently, at the age of 33, it appears improbable that Hammy will face the death penalty, and he will likely spend the rest of his life behind bars. Hammy was undeniably unhinged, with a touch of clownishness. However, some might argue that he endured a troubled childhood. Nevertheless, the extremity of his actions remains unparalleled. Interestingly, his older brother, who sought refuge with their grandparents at a young age, has since transformed into a prosperous individual, a millionaire who enjoys driving sports cars and has a loving family. Kent in the UK is home to New Ash Green. The post-war development harbors a strong feeling of community and a sense of belonging. One of the residents was 46-year-old Sarah Wellgreen. Sarah enjoyed a close relationship with her family, and they would regularly meet up for lunch, shopping, and go on holiday together. Her mother said she cared deeply for other people and would always stick up for the underdog. Sarah was a devoted mother to her 5 children who were the center of her world. She would go all out for birthdays and other holidays. She had 2 sons, Jack and Lewis, from a previous relationship and 3 children with her partner, 39-year-old Ben Lacomer. She worked hard as a beautician and would work on evenings and weekends alongside bringing up her children. Her partner Ben Lacomer had been born in Greenwich, and in the early 2000s he moved to Majorca, with dreams of becoming a pilot. The pair had met in December 2004 on a dating website. He made a good impression with Sarah's 2 sons, and Sarah decided to leave her job, and she and her 2 boys would move to Majorca to start afresh with Ben. But the happiness didn't last long. Due to her being unable to speak Spanish, she couldn't find a job, and this, coupled with her homesickness, made it very difficult for Sarah. Ben also wasn't able to become a pilot, so instead worked at the airport. They subsequently decided to move back to the UK, having already welcomed their first child. After settling into a new 4-bedroom home, 22 Bazes Shore and New Ash Green, Ben began working as a taxi driver, and Sarah would work as a beauty therapist. But the issues in the relationship began to show, with the pair arguing often. Sarah eventually decided to call time on the relationship, and in response, Ben threw her and her 2 sons out whilst keeping the 3 children they had together with him. Ben had arranged a court hearing for the very next morning in which he said Sarah had abandoned her children, and consequently he was awarded custody. Sarah was unable to defend herself as she was unaware as to what was happening. Sarah was devastated. She and her eldest 2 children went to live with her mother and stepfather. Family saved every penny so they could be able to go and see a solicitor for legal advice. And in August 2016, she would be awarded full custody of the children. It was also around this time that her personal life began to move in a more positive direction when she met Neil James. Sarah met Neil on a dating app in 2016, and their relationship would go from strength to strength, culminating in an engagement. But Sarah was worried that if she tried to move in with Neil, Ben would battle her for custody. In 2018, she offered Ben the opportunity for them to live in the house together and cope her and their children despite their romantic relationship coming to an end, something her family had begged her not to do. This wasn't by any means an ideal solution, as emotions between them were still running high. So Sarah decided to try and buy Ben's share of the house from him. Sarah had taken her children to school in the morning before heading to work to see her clients. She was also incredibly excited and happy as she had been able to secure a new, higher-paying job. At around 8 p.m., Sarah was seen coming home and heading inside. She sent several text messages, including to Neil. One message to a friend read, "There's always something to look forward to." You've just got to open your eyes and dream. The last text message was sent at 10 p.m. before she headed to bed. The next day was an incredibly special one, as it was one of her children's birthdays, and like always, she had planned for it. As the morning rolled around, Neil sent her a text message, but Sarah didn't reply. As the hours continued to tick by, still hadn't responded. Neil decided to reach out to Ben to see if he had seen her. Ben replied saying he thought Sarah was with him, as he hadn't seen her either. Neil called Sarah's family and explained that he had been trying to get hold of Sarah since the morning, but hadn't been able to make contact with her. Sarah could sometimes forget to charge her phone or accidentally leave it in the car, so her mother decided to call her too. But like Neil, she couldn't get hold of her. One of Sarah's sons used text messages, social media, and calling her work phone to try and get a response, but there was still nothing from Sarah. By the next day, she still hadn't come home. Her mother kept trying to get hold of her, but as Sarah continued to not respond, her mother knew something was seriously wrong. Everyone was becoming extremely concerned for her. They agreed that if by the next day she hadn't made contact with anyone or come home, they were called the police. It had now been 48 hours since Sarah Green had been seen, and she still had not been in contact with anyone. Ben contacted the police. DCI Ivan Beasley, senior investigating officer with Kent Police, was assigned to investigate her disappearance. Ben told the officers that after Sarah had arrived home on the 9th, he had put the children to bed and gone into his room, which was the loft conversion one, and she had gone to her room on the first floor. He explained that when he had woken up the next morning, Sarah wasn't home, but the car was still parked in its spot. As it was one of her children's birthdays, he said he had expected her to come home. A missing persons investigation was quickly underway, and a search of her bedroom was conducted. One thing immediately stood out. All of Sarah's personal effects were still there, including her money, bank cards, keys, and handbag. These were not things Sarah would have left without. For DCI Ivan Beasley, this was extremely concerning, as she had left her car keys at the house. One theory that was considered was that maybe she had gone out for a run or walk and become injured and unable to get help. A 5-mile search radius was set up around Sarah's home, going through fields and woodlands to try and find her, even checking hospitals to see if she had been admitted to any of them. In spite of all this, and after an extensive search, there was still no sign of Sarah. There were no phone records to indicate that she had agreed to meet up with anyone that night. DCI Ivan Beasley noted Ben Lacomer's demeanor. He said, "Ben didn't seem to be that concerned. The way he was presenting to us was described to me by my officers as quite odd. He didn't really want to engage with us. He didn't really want us at the house," which for somebody who had reported Sarah missing, he didn't seem to be acting in that way. He also said that officers discovered that Sarah's family had had to pressure Ben into contacting the police in the first place. Sarah's son utilized social media, and the close-knit community immediately came together to look for her. Hundreds of people from the local area came in to help. One of the volunteers, Sharon Brine, noted Ben Lacomer's behavior. She said, "We were very baffled with Ben when during day 3 or 4 of our searching, he went into the village office to book the village hall, and we thought it was completely bizarre. There's half the village looking for the mother of his children, and he's trying to arrange a kids' game in the village." Sarah's oldest 2 children attempted to visit their siblings, but were told they weren't allowed. Lacombe had taken the 3 youngest to his aunt's house, and he had also started court proceedings to gain custody of them. DCI Beasley said, within a few days of her disappearance, Ben had gone to the family court and was trying to have an urgent meeting so he could have primary custody of the children. In order to generate any leads, the police issued a press appeal to get information about Sarah out to the public. But as the days continued to pass, Sarah Green still hadn't been found. Concerns continued to escalate that she may have been met with foul play. Detective Superintendent Paul Fotheringham said, "Police went back to speak with Ben again to try and gain a better understanding of the dynamics and ins and outs of the family home. He told them that Sarah would often go missing, disappearing without telling anyone to go and meet other people." The police went to Neil's house to search the property and ask him further questions. As he was one of the last people she had had contact with, he explained that he had called her at 924 on the night she had last been seen. They spoke for around 15 minutes and then sent a few text messages back and forth before they said goodnight. Phone records showed that this was true, and as he was at home with his daughter at the time, he told the police to check the M25 cameras to prove he hadn't driven to Sarah's. His story checked out and Neil was in the clear. It had now been a week since Sarah Green had seemingly vanished, and police decided to check the local cameras, and more than 15,000 hours of footage would be searched. At around 2 a.m. on the 10th of October, The same time Sarah went missing, CCTV cameras picked up a car driving around. One of the images picked up on camera showed the vehicle with a logo on the driver's side door. Why did this pique the interest of investigators? Because it was similar to the vehicle driven by Ben Lacomer, a red taxi with a logo on the driver's side door. But the police had to be sure. They brought in an expert to compare his vehicle to the grainy one on the footage. The expert determined that the footage did show Ben's vehicle. Around 2 hours after it had first been captured on CCTV, the same vehicle was seen coming back. This appeared to contradict his annotations that he had been at home in bed when Sarah had gone missing. The home had an extensive CCTV system which was operated from Ben's bedroom so he could see the goings-on throughout the house. DCI Beasley said, "It was quite an elaborate setup. He had cameras at the side, at the front, and at the back of his house, all controlled by an assistant which was kept in his bedroom, which was in the converted attic part of the house. They checked the footage from the day Sarah had vanished. Ben was seen coming home, and nobody else was seen entering the property before Sarah came back. It wasn't just their home that had security cameras. Their neighbor's home did too. The neighbor's home had 3 months' worth of footage to watch. They could see that the CCTV camera from Ben and Sarah's home had been on almost constantly in the time leading up to Sarah going missing. The footage from the neighbor's house showed the infrared lights coming from Ben's cameras, and also showed that after midnight on the day she had last been seen, Ben's cameras had been switched off. Ben said the files from the cameras at his house weren't usable as they had been corrupted, and that the complex system in place actually hadn't been working for the past year. Another piece of footage that stood out to investigators showed him coming home. In the footage, his vehicle was clean. After taking the children to school the next day, the car was caught on CCTV again, and this time there was mud and dirt on the sides and wheels. At around 10:30, he went to the office where his taxi company operated. When the car pulls in, the dirt is gone. Another element that stood out was after watching the neighbor's camera, the police learned that he would always park his car in the same spot until the night Sarah had gone missing. That night, he parked it at the back of the property, somewhere not covered by the neighbor's CCTV. The task in front of the officers was huge. They didn't know where Ben had driven to that night and what he had done in the 2-hour window, and Sarah still hadn't been found. The police believed that he had murdered Sarah and then driven her body to a deposition site. On the 20th of December, the decision was made to arrest Ben Lacomer on suspicion of the murder of Sarah Wellgreen. He was then taken to the station to be questioned. Over the next 7 hours, he was interviewed by investigators. LaConva was silent and refused to answer any question put to him. During a search of the house, a shovel was found in the garden shed that appeared to be brand new. They needed to find Sarah, ascertain the cause of death, and prove that this had been done deliberately by Ben Lacombe. Specialists from the fire service and marine units from all over the country were drafted into the extensive searches to try and find her, including part of the Thames and land near the Blue Water Shopping Centre. Roads were closed off while searches were conducted and 1,400 sites were searched. But none led to Sarah's body. In spite of this, and on the basis of the case that had been built on the 28th of December 2018, Ben Lacomer was charged with the murder of Sarah Wellgreen. At Woolwich Crown Court, the trial of Ben Lacomer would begin. Prosecutor Alex Morgan QC would say in a documentary about the case, "Having a trial with no body presents unique challenges. One of the key moments for the prosecution was revealing a conversation that Ben had had with police several days before his arrest. They had requested his phone. He signed the consent form, but then refused to give consent for deleted data to be retrieved. He told them that he would give it to them the next day at the station, because it was late and he wanted to go to bed. But CCTV revealed that Ben hadn't gone to bed. His car was spotted parked by the River Thames late at night, trying to get rid of something. Something police believe was his mobile phone. Following Sarah going missing, Lacombe was captured on a CCTV camera in a shop, buying a new phone in the exact same make that he put his old SIM card into. DCI Beasley said, especially when there are concerns for a loved one, but actually Ben was more interested in the information we could retrieve from his phone and refused to give us his phone. Another element of the case that they argued was evidence of planning was the hours in between him leaving the address and coming home, indicating he had already chosen the deposition site for Sarah's body. When it came to the shovel that had been found during the search, the defense argued that it was there for his mother, so she could look after the flowers that were in front of the house. But the flowers of the home did not require such a big shovel, adding to the theory that it had been potentially used to dig a grave. Allison Morgan, QC from the prosecution, said that the idea he had bought what she referred to as a gravedigger shovel as a present for his mother was complete nonsense. Over the course of the trial, more information would be revealed that painted a clearer picture of Ben and Sarah's relationship. When she arrived home from work on the 9th of October, she told Ben that she was planning to buy his share of the house, as her new job would leave her in a financial situation where that was feasible. This meant that in more ways than one, Ben Lacomer was losing control, and if she were to leave him for good and sell the house, he would have been left with virtually nothing. The judge, jury, counsel, court clerk, and ushers were given a police escort to the family home to help them contextualize the evidence and see the inner workings of the home, including the intricate CCTV system. Defense barrister Rebecca Trolak, QC, concluded their case by saying, "What I ask of you is a lot less than what the prosecution asked. They are asking you to convict a 39-year-old man with no criminal convictions, not even cautions, of the carefully planned murder of the mother of his children. That is a big ask." After 30 days of the trial, it was time for the jury to deliberate. They would soon return their verdict. On 28th of October 2019, Ben Lacombe was found guilty of the murder of Sarah Wellgreen. He received life in prison with a minimum term of 27 years. He has never revealed what happened to Sarah or where she is. Should he continue to refuse to divulge any information, it could mean he remains in prison for a longer time under Helen's Law. Helen's Law, named after murder victim Helen McCourt, makes killers ineligible for parole if they do not tell police where they've hidden the body of a victim. This followed the tireless campaigning of Marie McCourt, mother of Helen, a 22-year-old insurance clerk who was murdered in 1988. Her murderer, Ian Sims, has never revealed her body's location. The petition calling for Helen's Law had gained more than 600,000 signatures and high-level government support. In November 2020, Helen's Law received royal assent. Under the law, killers could still be released if no longer deemed a risk to the public, even if they refuse to disclose information. But the parole board will be legally required to consider whether they have cooperated with inquiries as part of their assessment. One of Sarah's elder sons said, "There's still that missing piece, and it will always be like that because there'll always be that missing piece because of what he has done. I believe he's withholding that because that's the only sort of power he has left." Sarah's ex-husband also spoke about him wanting her body to be found. In the year that followed her disappearance, nearly 3,000 potential deposition sites have been identified, but none have led to Sarah. The community in New Ash Green has never given up on their search for Sarah Wellgreen. They have said they will never stop their search for her, and a Facebook page called Search for Sarah Wellgreen was set up too. For those who knew and loved Sarah, the agony of not knowing where she is and what happened to her is devastating. It is the hope of Sarah's family that he will one day reveal her whereabouts so that she can finally be brought home and laid to rest. Case of Schmidt family. Tyler Schmidt was born in Iowa, USA on November 13, 1979. He grew up in Cedar Falls, a city that is home to the University of Northern Iowa. As a young boy, Tyler joined the Boy Scouts, where he earned the prestigious rank of Eagle Scout. This experience sparked a lifelong love for nature and camping in him. The camps organized by the Lutheran Church, which promoted family bonding, were particularly enjoyable to him. In his free time, he learned to play the trumpet. Tyler's true passion, however, lay in adventure and sports. He was a member of the cross-country running team and the swim team at Northern Iowa High School in Cedar Falls. He also enjoyed outdoor activities like canoeing, hiking, and snowshoeing. Later, his interest in computing led him to Truman State University in Missouri, where he studied computer science and earned his degree. It was there that he met Sarah, who would later become his wife. Sarah was born on March 27, 1980, in Kansas City. During her childhood, she spent time near St. Louis with her siblings, Karen, Jane, and Adam. Sharing Tyler's passion for the outdoors, Sarah enjoyed bird watching and studying insects. Like Tyler, she was a dedicated Girl Scout and earned the highest honor, the Gold Award. Her adventure spirit was inherited from her mother, with whom she went on a backpacking trip to Central America. It's no wonder that Tyler knew Sarah was his soulmate when he met her as a student. Sarah excelled academically and demonstrated exceptional leadership skills, particularly in student projects focused on enhancing school life. Her positive leadership and inclination earned her the prestigious Truman Scholarship. While still at Washington High School in Washington, Missouri, this scholarship led her to Truman State University, where she met Tyler. As they fell deeply in love, she readily accepted his marriage proposal. Both Tyler's and Sarah's families supported their decision to marry, recognizing that they were perfect for each other and destined to build a beautiful family together. On June 22, 2002, Guests gathered at St. John Lutheran Church for Tyler and Sarah's wedding. Family members took their seats while Sarah waited outside with her father. At 22, the couple exchanged vows, promising to stay together until death parted them. They chose Boundary Waters for their 10-day honeymoon, sharing a love for nature. In the initial 10 years of their marriage, Tyler and Sarah prioritized establishing financial security and advancing their professional careers. After completing their undergraduate degrees in Missouri, the couple relocated to Lawrence, where they pursued their master's degrees at the University of Kansas. Sarah eventually worked as a computer science expert, while Tyler held jobs at a supermarket, a delivery company, and UPS. He also had a long-term career at a company specializing in business billing and payments, which lasted for 18 years. During this period, the Schmidts' marriage was filled with exciting experiences beyond their professional commitments. The couple made it a point to spend quality time together, exploring new outdoor destinations and engaging in various activities. They regularly socialized with family and friends, bonding over their shared love of board games. Occasionally, they participated in events organized by the Lutheran Church. As enthusiastic fans of the Kansas Jayhawks, they attended basketball tournaments held at the Allen Fieldhouse. The year 2013 was a mix of sadness and happiness for the couple. They suffered a significant loss when Sarah's father passed away from a heart attack, leaving his loved ones in grief. However, 2 years later in 2015, they experienced the joys of parenthood with the birth of their son, Arlo. In 2018, they welcomed their beautiful daughter, Lula Schmidt, into the world. When Arlo turned 6 and Lula was 3, the family made the decision to move to Cedar Falls to be closer to Tyler's family. The community of Cedar Falls warmly welcomed them, and soon they became active members of it. Tyler continued his work as a software engineer, while Sarah took on a role as an assistant at the city's public library. The children enrolled in the preschool program at Lincoln Elementary School. Tyler and Sarah were renowned for their kind nature and willingness to lend a helping hand, making everyone around them feel valued and important. This dedication earned them the admiration and affection of their neighbors and the entire community. Similarly, at the library, Sarah's warm and friendly personality quickly made her a well-known and appreciated figure, both among her colleagues and the wider community. The couple instilled their passion for outdoor activities and nature in their children, Arlo and Lula. In 2021, they began taking their kids camping, and despite their busy schedules, the children loved these trips so much that the parents made time for them whenever possible. By mid-2022, Sarah's workload had increased significantly. She took a day off in June to celebrate their 20th wedding anniversary and planned another day off in July for a family vacation. She had to finish a project for the library by July 26th, but was determined not to let it interfere with the family's plans. During the week of July 11th, Sarah told her brother's wife that she would be taking the kids camping at Makata Cave State Park in Jackson County, Iowa, a popular destination known for its 13 impressive caves and stunning natural landscapes. On Thursday, July 21st, the family packed up their car and drove 140 miles to reach Makata Caves. The Schmidt family, Tyler and Sarah, both 42, and their children Arlo, 9, and Lula, 7, arrived at the campsite before 5 p.m. As the camping area was crowded, they set up near the park's entrance. A few hours later, around 7 p.m., another family parked their vehicle about 200 feet from the initial family's tent. This family consisted of Joe and Cecilia Sherwin, and their 23-year-old son Anthony, who hailed from Nebraska. The Sherwins proceeded to set up 2 separate tents, one for Joe and Cecilia, and another for their son Anthony. At the time, they were on their way back home following a week-and-a-half-long camping trip that had taken them to Michigan's Upper Peninsula. The journey had been an enjoyable experience, and it had brought Joe, Cecilia, and Anthony closer together. Anthony was a devoted son, praised by his mom for his kind and sensitive nature. He was an excellent student and entrepreneur, working on a lucrative business venture that would financially support his parents. Though his mom, Cecilia, didn't know the details, Anthony kept her updated, mentioning only that his project involved secure emails. At Makata Caves, the campers retired to their tents as night fell. However, their peaceful slumber was disrupted before dawn on July 22nd by the sudden sound of gunshots. Just prior to the commotion, a man clad in black had entered the Schmidts' tent, attacking Tyler and then Sarah. Arlo, who had been asleep, was awakened by his sister Lula's screams. As he turned, he was met with a horrifying sight: blood inside the tent. Frantic with fear, he managed to escape and ran to seek help. As he fled, he heard one final shot, Meanwhile, Cecilia and Joe, who were camped nearby, rushed out of their tent amidst the chaos. Joe searched frantically for his son among the campers, asking if anyone had seen him. Arlo, still in a state of panic, continued to run until he encountered the sheriffs. He was screaming for help, explaining that his parents had been shot. Cecilia grasped his hand and ran with him to the park entrance. Once there, terrified and unsure of what had transpired, she pulled out her phone and dialed 911. She was beside herself with worry, fearing that her son might be among the victims, since he had been sleeping near the tent where the shots had come from. Cecilia called the Jackson County 911 operator to report hearing gunshots, but she struggled to pronounce the name of the park where she was, making it difficult to convey her location. She explained that she was with a boy who claimed that his parents had been shot. The call between Cecilia and 911 lasted 23 minutes as she answered the operator's questions. The operator relayed the attack to the police and park rangers, but the call was briefly disconnected. Cecilia persisted and called back, only to be put on hold while the dispatcher contacted emergency responders. Despite the tense and nervous atmosphere in the park, Cecilia remained calm, thanks to the adrenaline. After providing details about their exact location, she handed the phone to Arlo, the boy. He told the dispatcher that he was in a tent with his mom, sister, and dad, and when he woke up, he saw someone dressed in black holding a gun. When the 911 operator asked the child where his father was, he paused before responding that he thought his father was hurt. At 6:30 a.m., police officers and paramedics arrived at the campsite to find a horrific scene. All occupants of the Schmitz tent were dead. The once peaceful campsite had become a crime scene. Law enforcement immediately launched a search for the shooter, who could have been anywhere. The tactical team swiftly evacuated Makoka Cave State Park and Camp Shalom, a nearby Christian summer camp, located 1.5 miles from the attack site. As officials evacuated visitors, they gathered them outside the park. Once everyone was accounted for, it was clear that only one person, Anthony Sherwin, was missing, and he was armed. During an aerial search at 11 a.m., police found a body. Upon reaching it, they confirmed it was Anthony, deceased. Although an investigation was necessary, police identified him as the prime suspect in the homicides, believing he had committed the attack on the Schmitz before taking his own life. The authorities closed the park following the incident, a measure that remained in place until July 28th. The Iowa Department of Natural Resources offered their condolences, with their spokesperson expressing devastation on behalf of the entire team, stating that the event had shaken Iowa's tradition of enjoying its natural wonders. But the legacy would continue for the millions of families who recreate in Iowa's parks. As a mark of respect for Sarah's co-workers, the local authority closed the library for the rest of the day. The tragedy also drew reactions from other political leaders, including the Iowa governor, who expressed horror at the attack and sorrow for the unimaginable tragedy. A U.S. House representative from Iowa tweeted that it was a senseless and horrific crime. Sarah's family was devastated when they lost her. Her sister was particularly heartbroken, feeling as though her life had been turned upside down. She couldn't accept that Sarah was gone, and that she would no longer be able to pick up the phone and talk to her or watch her niece grow up. Family members came from as far away as North Dakota, Texas, and Michigan to attend the private funeral service, which was held at Greenwood Cemetery on August 2nd. Meanwhile, as the loved ones of the Schmitz coped with their grief and tried to console and care for Arlo, the authorities continued their investigation into the brutal crime. According to the Iowa Department of Public Safety's findings, which were based on the autopsy results, Tyler died from a gunshot wound and multiple sharp force injuries. Sarah's death was caused by sharp force injuries alone, and their young daughter was both shot and strangled. In early August 2022, authorities officially identified Anthony Sherwin as the person responsible for the murder of the Schmidt family. Sherwin, 23, had no prior criminal record and acted alone before taking his own life. According to the police, the investigation failed to uncover any motive behind the attack. The assistant director of the Division of Criminal Investigation clarified that there was no established connection between Anthony and the Schmidt family prior to the incident, despite them being neighboring campers. The Nebraska Police Department assisted in the investigation by searching the Sherwin family apartment, but found no suicide note or any indication that could explain why Anthony targeted the Schmidt family and himself. His Facebook page yielded no clues as it was completely blank. Regarding the weapon used in the attack, the assistant director of the Iowa Division of Criminal Investigation reported that a single hand-assembled firearm was recovered near Anthony's body. This type of weapon, commonly known as a ghost gun, is built by individuals using online purchase parts without restrictions, as they lack serial numbers, making them difficult to regulate and trace. Anthony's parents confirmed that their son had built his own weapon using online instructions. However, they clarified that he did this as a challenge, not because he wanted to own a gun. They emphasized that Anthony was responsible and had never hurt anyone or any animal. The parents, Cecilia and her husband, said their family had never owned guns before. But due to Nebraska's rising crime rates, they decided to acquire some. Because they were new to handling guns, they even took classes to learn how to use them properly. They brought the homemade gun on their trip to protect themselves from crime and possible bear attacks, which they had experienced before while camping. They intended to get rid of the gun later. When they returned home, Anthony's parents were determined to prove their son's innocence. They believed he was a victim of murder, not the killer. According to his mother, an independent autopsy report showed that Anthony had been shot twice, not once as the police claimed. She was puzzled by how he could have shot himself a second time, which challenged the authorities' suicide theory. They also questioned the description of the clothing the attacker wore. Cecilia remembered telling the 911 operator that the attacker was wearing black, which didn't match what her son had on, green shorts she had given him the day before the tragedy occurred. Furthermore, Cecilia and Joe claimed that the police did not reveal where they found Anthony's body, or whether the weapon he supposedly used to take his own life was the same one used in the attack on the Schmitz. Cecilia sent an email to the media outlining her concerns about the investigation into her son Anthony's death. She emphasized that Anthony had too many reasons to live and would not have abandoned everything in such a way. In her opinion, Anthony was incapable of killing and had no connection to the Schmidt family, and they had seen no signs of him planning an attack. When she asked investigators if they had conducted a ballistic test to confirm matches, they did not respond. Similarly, when Anthony's parents requested the final investigation report to commission an independent review, they received no response. In January 2023, a media outlet submitted a request for public records related to the case under Iowa's Open Records Law and the Freedom of Information Act. The request included incident reports, investigation documents, crime scene summaries, and autopsy reports. However, Devin McClone from the Iowa Department of Public Safety Commissioner responded that the requested records were not public, and the office could only share the immediate facts and circumstances of the case, as provided in the press release links. A few days after the tragedy, a media outlet emailed the official to ask if the weapon Anthony used to take his own life was the same one used in the murders, but she never responded. As it stands, the police believe that Anthony Sherwin was a random killer who brutally murdered 3 beloved members of a Cedar Falls family. However, the family of Cecilia and Joe refuses to accept that their son, who was kind and studious, was involved in the crime. They insist that he was another innocent victim and are determined to prove his innocence. Arlo, the sole survivor of the massacre, was taken in by his aunt and uncle in Cedar Falls. In an interview with a local newspaper, Sarah's brother proudly described his nephew as brave and reported that he was doing well mentally. The GoFundMe page set up after the tragedy continues to receive donations to support Arlo's care and education. The Irene Cortez case, an unfortunate accident or a contracted murder of a mother of many. They say a scorned woman is capable of unpredictable and desperate acts, with cold and cruel revenge being the most fearsome. But what about a scorned man? Many would say an offended man might resort to physical violence, drown his sorrows in alcohol, or combine these two scenarios. Yet men, generally less grudge-holding, can be more ingenious when it comes to revenge. The case of Irene Cortez, a Spanish citizen who met a mysterious end during a trip to Colombia, is complex and ambiguous. While her perpetrators were caught, convicted, and are currently serving long sentences, the deceased woman's family claims the real culprit remains at large and is portraying himself as a victim. Let's delve into this intricate story from the beginning and try to determine if a third party was involved or if the murder was indeed unintentional. It's worth noting that each party involved is still trying to prove their version of the truth. Who was Irene Cortez? Irene Cortez, born Lucas, was born in 1980 in sunny Granada, Spain, the capital of the province of the same name. She grew up in a well-off family with a brother and sister. Her parents ran a small but profitable business. According to some reports, her father passed away early, but her mother, Maria Lucas, took over the business operations, expanded the enterprise, and ensured her children lacked for nothing. Maria's older brother, Uncle Pedro Lucas, was also a significant help. Irene was the eldest of the 3 children. A beautiful and sociable girl, She loved being the center of attention and attracted boys from an early age. Shortly after finishing school, she married and was already pregnant. At 17, she became a mother for the first time, and 2 years later, she had her second child. Her mother and uncle provided considerable support, allowing her to pursue a good education despite early motherhood. In the early 2000s, Irene moved to the resort city of Malaga with her husband and 2 children. There, she opened an entertainment venue that quickly became popular and profitable. Initially a small disco bar, it eventually transformed into a full-fledged nightclub. In Malaga, the couple welcomed their third child, and life seemed prosperous and stable. At 25, Irene's husband was arrested and sentenced to 5 years in prison for trafficking illegal substances. Tragically, he lost his life in prison under mysterious circumstances. The responsibility of raising the children fell solely on Irene's shoulders. Remembering how her mother single-handedly raised 3 children, Irene was determined to persevere. She successfully managed her business, earned well, and had big plans for the future. Relationship with Farid Genesares. Farid Genesares, a native of Barranquilla, Colombia, was born in 1976. Growing up in a large impoverished family, he was the youngest of his siblings. His parents separated in the early 90s when he was still a teenager. His older siblings were independent by then, and Farid stayed with his mother. In February 2001, at 25, Farid, along with his elderly mother, moved to Spain in search of a better life. They settled in Malaga, where Farid took any job he could to support himself and his mother. In February 2005, he started working as a waiter at a nightclub owned by Irene. Irene immediately noticed Farid's hard work and reliability. She was also attracted to him, and Farid in turn did his best to please her. At the time, Irene's husband was incarcerated, and she planned to file for divorce but couldn't before her husband's untimely demise. Irene and Farid's employer-employee relationship soon blossomed into romance. Farid wasn't deterred by Irene's 3 children from previous relationships, nor was Irene bothered by Farid's humble background as a waiter whose salary she paid. Within months of starting their relationship, the couple decided to move in together. They settled in Irene's spacious apartment, and soon after, Irene became pregnant with Farid's child. They went on to have 2 children together. It's unclear if they were officially married, but Irene kept her first husband's surname, while the children born with Farid carried the Genesares surname. Imprisonment and infidelity. In February 2009, Irene's past seemed to repeat itself. Like her first husband, Farid was arrested for distributing illegal substances and sent to prison. Once again, Iran was left alone, this time with 5 children. Farid was sentenced to 3 years, but served only 1.5, being released early for good behavior and cooperation with the investigation. However, soon after Farid's imprisonment, Irina found solace in the arms of another man and lived with him for those 1.5 years. Farid learned of her infidelity only after his release. Understandably furious, he threatened Irene and her lover and almost attacked the man, narrowly avoiding another legal issue. Eventually, they resolved the matter peacefully. Farid forgave Irene for the sake of their children, and they resumed living together as if there had been no imprisonment or infidelity. Irene's relatives were always skeptical about Farid. Her mother and uncle disapproved of their relationship, suspecting Farid was only interested in Irene's money. Also, Irene's older children from her first marriage never accepted Farid, while the youngest, whom Farid had raised since the child was 2, saw him as a father figure. Fateful trip to Colombia. In early 2011, Irene's husband, Farid, expressed the need to visit his homeland of Colombia due to his father's severe illness. Reportedly, Farid's estranged father was diagnosed with advanced cancer, and his sister in Barranquilla had informed him of the dire situation. Irene, who had long wished to visit Farid's homeland, decided to accompany him. She was eager to meet Farid's father, whom she had never met, and also experience the legendary Barranquilla Carnival, typically held in late February. Moreover, Irene, who hadn't taken a vacation for years due to her dedication to work and raising her 5 children, saw this trip as an opportunity for a much-needed break. The couple planned a 10-day trip across the ocean with Irene's mother and younger sister agreeing to care for her children during this period. Despite her mother, Maria Lucas' attempts to dissuade her from the journey due to a bad premonition, Irene disregarded her concerns. At the same time, the family faced financial difficulties due to a seasonal downturn in their business. Despite this, Irene had personal savings of €3,000 in cash hidden at home. But on the eve of their trip, she discovered the money had mysteriously vanished, almost derailing their plans. Irene quickly borrowed the necessary funds from her uncle and close friends. She also booked their flight tickets and a hotel in the city center, thoroughly preparing for a journey that, tragically, would be her last. Mysterious murder. On February 27, 2011, the couple arrived in Colombia. The flight was uneventful, and they immediately checked into their hotel. Irene called home to reassure her mother. However, 2 days later, Farid informed Irene's eldest son, 14, of his mother's death. Initially, Farid claimed an accident, but it was soon revealed that Irene was murdered during a robbery at a Barranquilla entertainment venue. The case quickly became a major news story in Colombia. The narrative was that Irene, a Spanish tourist, was killed by robbers who fled the scene, triggering a citywide policeman hunt. However, the circumstances of the robbery and murder seemed unusual and suspicious. The attackers did not appear to be trying to steal anything, but instead shot Irene in the heart and then fled in haste. Police and local media representatives quickly arrived on the scene. Despite the fact that Farid witnessed the shooting of his partner during an interview with journalists, he looked quite calm, not corresponding to the image of a grief-stricken widower. The Spanish embassy in Bogotá confirmed the murder, adding that Irene's remains will be repatriated after the necessary investigations. The exact events of the night of March 2nd have yet to be clarified by investigators. In the meantime, authorities are actively pursuing the attackers responsible for this senseless crime. Surveillance footage. The case of Irene Cortez's mysterious death seemed to gain clarity after reviewing surveillance footage from cameras installed at the location where the murder occurred. On March 1st, Irene and her partner, Farid Janissaris, had planned to meet Farid's brother, his sister, and their spouses. The group of 6 enjoyed the carnival, walked around town, and then, at Farid's suggestion, went to a local bar for dinner and entertainment. By 1 a.m., Irene, Farid, and his relatives were the only customers at the bar, as surveillance footage clearly shows. Around 2 a.m., 2 young men sitting away from the group entered the bar. They did not order anything and did not look comfortable, which caught the attention of the bar manager because of their suspicious behavior. Moreover, their young appearance made the manager check whether they were of legal age. The young men refused to show their IDs, and when asked to leave, one of them pulled out a gun and aimed it at the manager. His accomplice produced a knife, but soon retreated out of the camera's view. The armed assailant pushed the manager aside and approached Irene's table, announcing a robbery and demanding mobile phones and cash. His knife-wielding partner reappeared, presumably to collect valuables while the gunman kept the group under threat. However, he didn't get a chance to act. Confronting Irene, the gunman ordered Farid to stand for a pocket search. As Irene reached for her purse, the assailant lunged at her with the same hand holding the gun. A shot was fired as he grabbed the purse, striking Irene directly in the chest. She collapsed to the floor as the assailants fled without taking anything. Farid and his brother chased after them while his sister tried to stop Irene's bleeding, and his brother's wife called for emergency services. Unfortunately, the culprits were too fast to catch. The men returned to the bar attempting to aid Irene, but it was too late. Emergency responders arrived quickly, yet Irene succumbed to her injuries en route to the hospital, leaving behind a baffling case and a grieving family. The hunt for the perpetrators, arrest, and trial. In the wake of the robbery and homicide that took Irene Cortez's life, law enforcement mobilized all available resources. The city was teeming with tourists for the carnival, and ensuring their safety was paramount. A reward of 10 million pesos, about 3,500 euros, was announced for information leading to the culprits. The first suspect, the gunman Brian Dario, was apprehended the next day. He quickly implicated his accomplice, Juan Carlos. Juan, 18, surrendered to authorities, hoping for leniency. During interrogation, Dario claimed dire financial straits, debts, and a sick child in need of costly treatment drove him to the crime, corroborated later by his relatives. He maintained that Irene's shooting was accidental, occurring while trying to snatch her purse. Juan Carlos contended he was an unwitting participant. He said Brian didn't reveal his plans, but asked for backup in a job. He claimed to have only a small knife for intimidation, not harm, and left the scene once he realized Brian's intentions. However, surveillance footage contradicted his claims, showing him returning to Brian. With both perpetrators in custody and their confessions, the case appeared solved, with prison sentences looming. The court found Dario guilty of robbery and homicide under aggravating circumstances, sentencing him to 23 years, Carlos received 17 for complicity in these crimes. Accusations against Farid and new crime details. From the early stages of the investigation, the family of the deceased woman openly accused Farid of orchestrating the murder of his wife. Irene's mother and uncle hired a detective who conducted an independent investigation, gathering additional materials and evidence to hold the man accountable and prove his involvement in the crime, starting with the earlier mentioned disappearance of €3,000 from the hiding place in Cortez house. According to Maria Lucas, only Farid knew about this money, and he was the only one who could have discreetly taken it. The woman told her daughter about this from the beginning, but she did not want to listen. Now, she believed that her son-in-law used this money to pay Dario to kill his wife. Another weighty argument was the fabricated illness of the man's father, whom he was so eager to visit. It turned out that no cancer diagnosis was made for the elderly parent, and he was quite healthy for his age. Farid concocted this story, making it the main pretext for the trip to Colombia. Also, it was Janissaires who initiated the visit to that fateful establishment. Moreover, he insisted on continuing the feast deep into the night when all the other visitors had long dispersed, and their company was alone in the hall. Further, the detective conducted a detailed analysis of those very recordings from the cameras, giving an assessment of what was happening and making his own conclusions. He noticed that the criminals acted strangely. Juan was clearly scared and most likely really did not understand what was happening while Brian approached the company, came up to Farid and raised him, but did not directly threaten him with a gun. It looked like the men knew each other and acted cohesively. Then Farid, strangely, moved behind Irene, who was sitting at the table. When she reached into her bag to get her wallet, the criminal with the gun looked at the man as if waiting for a signal. It's hard to say exactly whether he received any kind of sign as the victim and her husband were back to the camera. After the shot, the man chased the killer, but in the expert's opinion, he deliberately let him escape. However, the latter statement can be considered controversial as Brian was armed with a gun and Farid could reasonably fear for his life. Also in question was the man's behavior after his chosen one was declared dead. He willingly gave interviews to the arrived correspondents, talked about the details of what happened, and at the same time, did not look too upset or depressed. Another important question. Why after the tragedy did Janissaires call not Irene's mother, not her uncle or any of the adult relatives, but dialed the number of her 14-year-old son to tell him about his mother's death? According to Maria Lucas, he wanted to personally inflict pain on the teenager, punishing him for not recognizing the stepfather's authority and treating him disrespectfully. The woman's uncle was the first to dare to give an interview in the press and openly talk about his suspicions and the results of the investigation. Pedro Lucas was sure that Farid planned the trip in advance, essentially luring Irene into a trap. The money stolen from her was used to pay for the services of a hired killer. And after her death, he planned to establish guardianship over the children and take over the business of his deceased wife. Farid's mother did not silently listen to her son being accused of a terrible crime and openly stood up for her offspring. The woman claimed that her offspring was madly in love with Irene and her children and would never harm her. However, in the end, the parent inadvertently let slip a phrase about the chosen one not having to cheat on Farid, as this greatly offended his pride. Also, an unpleasant detail emerged about Janissaires leaving Spain on fake documents, as he was not allowed to leave the country, because he had recently been released from prison on parole. The man himself denied this information, stating that he left legally, and Irene acted as his guarantor. Funeral. Without the widower. 12 days after the tragedy, Irene's body was returned to her native Spain. The funeral was conducted with a closed casket as the remains had begun to decompose after such an extended period. Hundreds attended the funeral. Family, friends, neighbors, and even those who didn't personally know Cortez, but had heard about the resonant story and wanted to express their condolences to the family. The only person missing from the farewell ceremony was Farid, who simply feared returning from Colombia, apprehensive of retribution. Farid claimed that the relatives of his late wife had repeatedly threatened him and his elderly mother. For this reason, before flying back to Spain, he intended to appeal to the authorities to ensure his safety. He sought a protective order to be able to attend the funeral, but his request was denied, and Janissaires decided not to take the risk. In turn, Farid filed a complaint in court against the relatives of his deceased wife, who he alleged hindered his return home. However, Maria and Pedro Lucas denied his claims, stating they were most interested in his return to face trial in Spain. Additional court proceedings. With new circumstances and accusations against Farid, an additional investigation and court proceedings were conducted. Dario and Carlos, already serving their sentences in a Colombian prison, were interrogated about their acquaintance with janissaires and a possible premeditated conspiracy. However, Brian categorically denied this assumption. He continued to insist that the murder was an accidental result of a failed robbery attempt. He claimed he had never seen Fareed before, let alone been hired as a hitman for his wife. The accusations indeed seemed to be grasping at straws with no irrefutable evidence of premeditation or a contract killing, only assumptions and interpretations of the events on the recording. Dario also confessed that he was under the influence of alcohol and prohibited substances that evening. Hence, his poor recollection of the event's chronology. As for Carlos, he maintained that his friend did not involve him in his plans, and everything that happened in the bar was as shocking to him as it was to those they attacked. Blon appeared to be telling the truth, but Brian's words, who made the fatal shot, raised some doubts. Consider this. He failed to commit the robbery, ended up in prison, but his sick child still received the necessary expensive treatment. Brian claimed that kind-hearted people learning about his motive helped him. However, the Lucas family's lawyers tried to prove that the 3,000 euros stolen from Irene, which Fareed paid for her murder, were spent on the treatment. Supposedly, Brian agreed to sacrifice himself and go to prison to save his child and secretly pass the money to his wife. This version, however, was never proven. Returned to Spain. Only after obtaining a court order that guaranteed his safety did janissaires decide to return to Spain. Several months had passed since the tragedy, and the media frenzy had subsided. Upon his return, janissaires claimed to have brought investigation materials proving his innocence in his wife's murder. He cited his main reason for returning as a desire to care for the children he shared with Irene, who had been under the care of the deceased's relatives during his absence. 6 months later, Fareed decided to give a major interview in which he revealed that he had lost virtually everything. He was jobless. His passport had been annulled, preventing him from leaving the country. And to add insult to injury, his friends had turned their backs on him, and the mother and uncle of his late wife forbade him from seeing his children. Janissaires repeatedly faced Maria and Pedro Lucas in court. He accused them of threatening him while they attempted to prove his involvement in Irene's murder. However, neither side could substantiate their claims. Ultimately, the children remained in the custody of their grandmother and uncle, and the widower was unable to claim any of his late wife's property.